Dobrý den, já se jmenuji Hana Janečková. Jsem tady, abych vás uvítala na křestu knihy Dotek, zvířete, kterou jsme nedávno vydali společně s nakladatelstvím ArtMapa a Institutem úzkosti, což je vlastně platforma, která funguje v Praze. A tento křest bude v angličtině, takže toto je vlastně poslední věc, kterou říkám v češtině a nadále budu pokračovat v angličtině. Takže za to se omlouváme, ale doufáme, že to nevadí a že si stejně s námi křest užijete. Takže teďka bych možná chtěla hello everyone in this uneasy times. I would like to welcome everyone. There's a war in Ukraine, and of course, thank you for joining us and thinking with us about different possibilities and different worlds that Animal Touch is hoping to provide. So welcome here to the launch of Animal Touch, a publication commissioned by the Prague-based platform, the Institute of Anxiety, in collaboration with the publishers ArtMap. My name is Hana Janečková. I'm a curator based at Display in Prague and a researcher at the Center of Audiovisual Studies at FAMU in Prague. And I'm currently in New York on a Fulbright scholarship. So if the light doesn't match to your light, that's the reason. There's a bit of time difference. And most importantly, I'm one of the editors of Animal Touch, and I would like to welcome here Czech artist, activist, and educator Evou Koťátkovou from the Institute of Anxiety, who is the co-editor of the book, and she will be co-hosting this event. Eva was the original initiator of Animal Touch, and I'm greatly thankful to her for this invitation and for her asking me to help her to work on this project. And I would like to welcome here our audience, especially our dearest guests who contributed to the book. So I would like to welcome here London-based researcher, writer, and professor of political aesthetics, Esther Leslie, agroecology and food expert and artist Tomáš Hrůza, the curator and writer Lucia Pietrusty, and Czech artist Maria Lukáčová. And of course, I would like to welcome here Tomáš Hrůza from the publishers ArtMap, because these guys helped us to actually make this happen. So I would like to, first of all, introduce the structure of the event for the audience. So first of all, the editors will introduce the book, which will last about 20 minutes. Then we will move on to the contributors block, where our speakers will present 5 to 10 minutes long presentation. And then we will open the discussion to our audience. So please, if you have any questions during the presentation, bear with us. You can type your questions straight into comments tab on your screen. We will make sure they will be the first one we'll answer in the discussion block. And I would like to, of course, thank everyone who put this event together. It's namely Ida Tausch from the Institute of Anxiety and the people from ArtMap who are organizing technical support. Thank you, David. Okay. So now I would like to pass on Eva, and I'd like to invite Evou Koťátkovou to tell us about how was Animal Touch conceived straight from the very beginning. So yeah, I'm passing to Eva. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me well. Good evening, everyone. I join Hana in welcoming you here tonight, and we will for sure soon give word to our dear guests, authors who contributed to this book. But for now, I would like to thank everyone involved in the project. This will take some time, so I'm sorry for that, but I have to, and I very much want to do that on behalf of both me and Hana. And after that, I will say a few words about how the whole project started, how it was conceived. So I will be thanking, on behalf of both of us, the Institute of Anxiety and the ArtMap. I hope I will not forget anyone. We would like to thank all the authors for their inspirational contributions. Petr Dobrý, Kateřina Konvalinová, Bob Kuřík, Esther Leslie, Marie Lukáčová, Astrida Neymanis, Lucia Pietrojusty, Filipa Ramos, Tomáš Uhnák, Tereza Vandrovcová, Lenka Vítková, and Klára Vasáková. We would like to thank Linda and Daniela Dostálkovi, artistic duo who deal with the subject of animal rights and animal representation in their own artistic work for already quite some time, and I would say in quite a powerful way, and who gave the book its visual body and created a new series specifically for the book by making zoomorphing vegetables, something that you could see both on the cover and through the whole structure of the book. We are very grateful to the Institute of Anxiety for giving home to this project at the beginning, and specifically we want to mention Ida Tausch, without whose careful production work the project would not have existed. We would like to thank to all our translators and correctors, John Hill, Heather McGaddy, Markéta Musilová, Olga Peck, Guy Tabačník, David Vichnár, Jiří Novák, David Livingstone, and Dagmar Pilařová. And last but not least, we would like to thank our dear publishers, ArtMap, namely Tomáš Hrůza, for trusting in the project from the beginning till the end, hopefully, and even thought they could have probably imagined other, maybe more popular topics to support. So they have chosen this one. So thank you for that. And now to the project Animal Touch and how it was conceived. Animal Touch started as a research project of the Institute of Anxiety very early on, back in 2018, the same year when the Institute of Anxiety was founded. And since one of the initial goals of the Institute of Anxiety was quite contrary to what psychiatry does, which is suppressing the symptoms, not solving the causes, the Institute wanted to take a longer journey and somehow go behind the symptoms and ask for the systemic causes of anxiety in today's world, trying to see where we can, each one of us and us collectively, develop different imaginative or perhaps more activistic and other scenarios leading to a change. And so in this context and with such a vision, we could not ignore anxiety of animal suffering in factory farms and elsewhere, and we could not ignore exploitation of nature in general. So we started, as I said, in 2018 already with two projects. One which was a direct predecessor of this book, and I will talk about it in a detail in a minute, and one called The Woods, Community for Cultivation, Theory and Art, which organizes a series of gatherings, workshops, as well as yearly symposiums taking place in a forest and meadow at Orlické Mountains. This is a project where human and other than human relationship is constantly examined through these different formats and gatherings and formats of sharing. And important part of this project is also simply caring for the site and its inhabitants across species. But now I will speak about the direct predecessor of Animal Touch, which was originally called Large-Scale Livestock Farming, Non-Humans, Humans, Climate and Machines, which started with the intention to look specifically at factory farming as a contemporary tool which legitimizes violence towards other species, a tool of power and control that that applies binary divisive logic to how we perceive the world and ourselves in it, because it tries to persuade us that there are those that deserve our attention, our care and respect, and those that don't, because they are labeled as useless, unfitting, or they are labeled as useful and fitting, but just to one quite precisely articulated, or let's say constructed predefined purpose, one which is produced or one which produces side effects such as inequality, lack of empathy, exploitation, and so on. The concept of factory farm is quite, or factory farms is quite clear in describing the human and other than human relationship, as it clearly says who is the privileged one and who is the oppressed. It says who is edible and who is non-edible, and so on. So the intention of the series was gradually uncover the network of actors and relationships that keep this wheel of factory farming rolling, showing how huge impact it has on disruption of deeper, more empathetic relationship to animals, and how huge impact it has also on global problems like climate change, migration, undervalued labor, degradation of environment, and so on. Part of this research was thus conversations with small farmers, conversation with activists about their different strategies, conversations with teachers and children, for example, about how this unequal human and other than human relationship is deeply rooted in our upbringing, what prejudices and blocks or even fears or feelings of guilt we have, which do not allow us to break the traditional power dynamics, and so on. This was one of the questions that we were asking them. Children were also, even though they are not included in this book, hopefully there will be another coming in the future. Children were also quite important voices in helping to reimagine the world as it is into something we want it to be. So using imagination as a critical tool, and this is something that we at the moment as Institute of Anxiety continue with a series of children workshops that will end up in formulating our experience and experiments into Zine formats. Part of the research was also a discovery about how much is our former prime minister linked to animal suffering through his ownership of many smaller or bigger companies linked to the factory farming. So quite a sad but not a surprising fact. Important figure in the whole process, and especially at the beginning, was Tereza Vandrovcová, as she's someone who is systematically caring for improving conditions of animals, both from the position of activist and as well a theorist who is teaching, the theoretician who is teaching animal studies at the Charles University in Prague. You can also find her contribution, the mechanism of contradictory relationship to animals, in the book. And the research was also launched in parallel and as a support of actions for End of the Cage Age, a long-term campaign with the goal of banning caged farming in European Union. And since the Institute of Anxiety tried from the very beginning to connect people from different disciplines to meet and share and to discuss, but also to collaborate in the belief that art can somehow bring something important and unique to the contemporary debates about pressing issues, world issues or problems. The goal of the project was also to create and somehow to bring into the book a kind of cacophony of different voices that use different forms, languages for their expression. And this is where Hana, and I'm really grateful for that, this is where Hana joined the project, and we then together continued the research and expanded the original series for new commission. for new commissions. So this is what Hana will talk about in more detail, I believe, quite soon, how the project then expanded into the book. But before that, I will pass my word to Tomáš Hrůza from ArtMap Publishing House to have the chance to say that maybe it was not exactly like that, or to correct me in any way he wants.
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Tomáš Hrůza. I'm representing here our little publishing house, ArtMap, and I'm so happy that I can we can launch today like this in online event like this little book we publish in Czech and English version, and so for us was the second cooperation with the Institute of Anxiety. So I'm glad we can do these things together, because it's really somehow fit to our focus, and also like which I really like on this book, like it's not like artist book, it's not like theory, it's not scientific book, it's some mix of everything. So I really like the approach, like what came from the editors, and Eva and Hana, like the conception of the book. It's in this form, and for me personally, actually, like was the topic important, because before I study art school, I did like agriculture high school with the top. There was some department of agrobusiness, so you can imagine what kind of processes I had to learn, and so was also like in deep 90s. When the Czech agriculture was completely in decay, and so before it got some resuscitation from European Union, from these kind of subsidies, so it's a little bit change, but yeah, it was the topic I was really like to explore, and again I'm happy like it happened, and it meet in this type of book, in this form of activism text, like theory text, and these like artist approaches. So Eva already said like every thanks what I wanted to say as well. So I'm just want to say also like thanks for the financial support we got from Ministry of the Culture and the State Fund of the Culture. So without this money, we couldn't make book. And so now I would like to again pass the word, the speech to Hana, and continue with the evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Tomáš, and thank you, Eva. And as I mentioned, I also, even though maybe I won't go into names, but I would like to also thank for like an enormous job that the translators and correctors, and obviously Ida Tauscht from the production of the Institute Anxiety, what they've done, because we turned this book around in less than a year, which is in 2 languages, with 14 contributions, with new artistic commission by Linda and Daniela Dostálkové. It was really a big undertaking, and it was happening at COVID time. So obviously it is like, we are deeply grateful to everyone that stayed with us, and we pulled it together, and the book is here, and it's excellent, and you can read it everywhere. You can read it on Subway because the format is so cool. And yeah, so thank you. So I will not like completely like repeat things that I maybe that we have written in the introduction of the book, because you can go and buy it. But I would like to maybe like add few maybe like ideas or problems that we were trying to tackle, what we wanted to do with the book, so we have a better idea like what we were going through when we were putting it together. So as Eva mentioned, the book originated from a series of commissioned essays and artistic research into factory farming that the Institute of Anxiety started in 2018. So when I got this invitation from Eva, we've had this like exciting collection of material addressing directly the idea of industrial farming and factories. But also we had this like very highly imaginative responses by artists such as Kateřina Konvalinova and Lenka Vítkova. I hope they are here with us today, because I can't actually see. So we discussed further conceptualization of the project and thought about multiple strategies. How can we really approach this subject? And we realized that these questions are actually problematic for any sort of like human or animal rights activist or anyone else who really attempts to communicate very difficult issues to the public. So we were asking, what are the workable strategies, direct testimonies about what are these workable strategies? Are we talking about direct testimonies about the experience of animal exploitation and suffering? Or shall we like position this book in the way of like positive reinforcement of what has been done, what could be done, and where is the place for sort of like speculative futures, for imaginative strategies, etc. So we realized that we want to open the publication to different approaches and maybe to different publics, which was kind of a little bit of an experiment, because I know in a way the book includes many different like positions, aspects, and types of writing, but we actually wanted to see how this can work for many different kinds of public. So it was sort of a risk that we have taken with the book, that it's not necessarily an academic anthology, but it's not just an artist book. So we see it more as a sort of this living object that kind of like a lot of people interacted with, and that will hopefully roll on and further develop. So so basically we wanted like one of the things that we agreed on with Eva was that we want to like give people tools and basically imaginative and conceptual tools to think about their relationship with animals and with connection issues as like value extraction, how we think about the nature in the broadest sense, and what does it mean, how can we position towards like everyday experience of our relationship with animals, such as like meat consumption. So that was like something that we knew that we kind of wanted to kind of like provide that like sort of positive reinforcement about what our relationship with animals can be and should be, and how it connects to the ideas of labor and exploitation. And we also knew that we wanted to represent feminist perspectives on the issue, because for us this like coalitional thinking about, or allied thinking between ecological and feminist project is crucial for our thinking about like possible futures for the planet's survival. So obviously like the thinkers like Donna Haraway, Marisol de la Cadena, Astrid Neymanis, Vichy, and Desprez were huge influence on us when we were putting this book together, as much as projects that were happening in the art world, like that Lucia and Philippa Ramos curate. So that was really very inspiring to us when we were looking about how we will position this book in terms of relation to like art practice, what art can do, what can art do, how it can like help us to, and how has it positioned itself to like this relationship between the human and more than human or other than human. So we obviously thought about like the labor. Of course, it's the crucial topic for the book, and we thought about so many kinds of labor that animals do. Like we thought about like labor that apart from obviously factory farms, which is the prime example, we thought about zoos, entertainment, how much of emotional labor do pets and other companion animals have to carry out. And so obviously this imaginative potential of speculative feminism of Donna Haraway, her like thinking about sympoiesis, about making kin, was our starting point. But we also thought about these like we wanted to be perhaps thought about like how much this question of labor in terms of in the relation to companion species remains like it's not properly addressed. And if we had the space and scope for a larger project, we would obviously want to address more this like situation, what happens with our pets, with our like who kind of, for example, when we think about our dogs who kind of we force them to adhere to human routines. They have to eat this very strange food that we give them. They have to live in the cities, and they have to adjust their biological cycles, such a pooing and being to like artificial human-based routines. So these are the perspectives that we wish we also explored more in the book, but they appear in the book, but perhaps, this would be a place where we would like to go further. And of factory farming necessarily connects the animal to the machine, and this chains of exploitation, such industrial farming, machine, chains, like catalogs from like international meat production chains. We collected all of that, and we were looking at the way like hormone nomads, affective tools are used in increasing of production, and like in production of milk, of like growth support, etc. We looked at all sorts of technologies and feeders when we were thinking with artists who participated on the book, with Maria Lukáčová and with Dostálkovi. When we are thinking about these sort of like visual material, we were looking at all these sort of aspects of human, animal and machine connection. So that's why maybe like when in the introduction we kind of like this project by Helen and Meyer Harrison was such a point of departure for us, because it was Harrisons, who are Californian ecological artists. They in the 70s they became very like sort of infamous for the project when they enclosed local fish in water tanks in the world's most important museum, such as Hayward Gallery, and to see if they could create this self-sufficient model of survival where and part of it was of course like this electrocuting of the fish for the audience, but as I mentioned in the text, the fish stopped reproducing, showing how it's crucial for us, how this like connection to the rest of the world is crucial for our survival. So perspectives like such as localism, we actually like we positioned ourselves to localism in terms of we need to kind of look outside at these like interconnected ways of living. And that's why like the work of Tomáš Uhnák in this text, in Animal Touch, that connects slave labor and human and other human types of labor in this sort of chains is really important to us, because Tomáš also, as he will sure mention, it sort of provides ways out and position that we can take in this global interconnected chain of the Anthropocene. And of course, like essay of Esther's Leslie essay that kind of addresses labor, aesthetics, and Marxist positioning to like nature exploitation is such a valuable contribution to the book, and it opens the book really incredibly, and we are really grateful for this like positioning of animal touch within these contexts. So I would like to maybe like draw it to the end, and of course meat consumption is one of the most divisive issues, and that's why it's articulated in so many ways in Animal Touch. So how to tackle different levels of exploitation, that's something that we experience on everyday, like our everyday interactions with meat, with its consumption, that like happens on libidinal, imaginative, and sensual level or affective level, that sort of meat consumption sort of embodies. And this is like this perspective that Lucia is bringing in her essay, Who Am in her essay on language, matter, and spirituality, this sort of idea how metaphors, linguistic metaphors, feed into like spiritual and matterly experience is really important. And we also appreciate like Maria Lukáčová vision of like of connection of human and cow's experience through contamination and through our shared medicated sexuality, and of course, as Eva mentioned, Tereza Vandrovcová attempts to bring here very concrete and very systematic approach to the questions of carnism or like meat eating. So with this, like, I would like to say that I would like to leave this question actually open. We wanted to ask with this book, what does is like, how can be art the space where we can reimagine things? How can we contribute to more equitable and just relationship with animals? What ideas, positions and questions has recent and contemporary art tried to raise? And this is obviously like an open question. So apart from all these sort of like things that I highlighted in this introduction, maybe this is something that perhaps will be answered more in the discussion and presentation of the speakers. So thank you. And I will give now, I will move on to I will maybe move on to speakers block. So just quickly, we will. I want to now give space to our speakers. So first, I would like to invite Professor Esther Leslie to present her contribution to the book, and I will quickly read her bio. So please bear with me. So Esther Leslie is Professor of Political Aesthetics at Birkbeck University of London, UK. Her books include various studies and translations of Walter Benjamin, as well as Hollywood Flatlands, Animation, Critical Theory, and the Avant-Garde, verso 2002, Synthetic Worlds, Nature, Art, and the Chemical Industry, Reaction 2005, Derelict, Thought Worms from the Wreckage, Ankan 2014, Liquid Crystal, The Science and Art of a Fluid Form, Reaction 2016. And now to project on milk and dairy, Deeper in the Pyramid with Melanie Jackson, that was Binary Peter in 2018. And for the Limerick Biennial, it's the Inextinguishable with Melanie Jackson again, and future work includes research for Chemical City, an exhibition at the Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art on the chemical industries of the northeast of England. So now I would like to ask Professor Leslie to introduce her presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hana and Eva, for involving me in this fabulous project. I'm still reading through the book because there's so many beautiful and horrifying, in the best sense, things in there. So thank you. I will just do a short summary of some of the ideas from my talk, and I have a few images just to illustrate things. So here we begin. There was a moment in the early days of the global pandemic when reports surfaced here and there of improvements in air and water quality across the world because production and traffic ceased for a while. Images circulated of herds of mountain goats and wild boar exploring deserted cities, and there were schools of dolphins exuberant in the Bosphorus. Some of these images were hoaxes, but all of them spoke for a moment to the idea that the disruption that had come from some sort of imbalance in human-animal interrelations could be rewrited, could be put back together in favor of nature in the face of the global crisis. And that vision continued to persist for a while in proposals around the rewilding of city centres after the pandemic, taking the declining shopping malls and turning them into pocket woodlands and wildflower. Very little of that, I think, has really come into being beyond enclaves for the rich. In these visions, nature serves as a haven. It guarantees human well-being, as it long has done in utopian thinking, at least since the lotus eaters whiled away their time in a narcotic haze of apathy. The Hyperborea led a perfect existence beyond the north winds, among the poplar trees, with 2 crops of grain a year in a permanent spring. In Thomas More's Utopia, they cultivate their gardens with great care so that they have both vines, fruits, herbs, and flowers in them. Utopia is bountiful. And later, quite a while later, William Morris, the utopian, drew nature, made it almost palpable on the flat walls of well-furnished parlours, his coiling leaves, delicate flowers, ripe fruits, birds and butterflies, in what for him was a utopian counter-imagining of the industrial factory society. After industrialism, after the consumerism that industrialism produces and then goes into a feedback relationship, it would seem only proper that now, at the end of something, what seemed to promise to be the end of something, nature would flourish at the expense of non-nature. Nature is often presented as a guarantor of cyclicality, of reproduction and predictability, which would suggest it is in antithesis to history, which is contingency, sudden twists and turns. And yet it is increasingly evident that nature is subject to history, and what has seemed more or less eternal is subject to quite rapid evolution, extinction, unstoppable melting. And a glacial pace might not refer to something long and drawn out anymore, but rather an abrupt turn without any return. Nature becomes unknown and unknowable. In becoming unknown, is it the case that we are also blocked from knowing part of ourselves inasmuch as we are of nature? Philosophers have long debated the extent to which humans are part of or separate from nature. The notion of human nature implies a special relationship of humans to nature. But the argument tends to devolve into questions of inherent selfishness or the relationship of the human self to rationality, ethical behavior, or original sin. Another line of philosophical inquiry explores differently the presence of nature within the human and the extent of humanness within nature. When Hegel, for one, observed a child flinging stones into a river and enjoying the circles that erupt on the surface of the water, he decided that humans possess an inherent need to make or reproduce themselves in an external world. This is their nature. Where animals are compelled by instinct or immediate appetites and so may gobble up the surrounding world that becomes food for them or home for them, humans are assumed to cultivate a mediated relationship to nature, shaping it towards both use and beauty. Overcoming a sense of terror before nature's powers, humans extend themselves through an attitude that nature exists solely for human benefit. But Marx takes up this thought. Through action on nature, humans develop their needs. In reproducing the conditions of their existence, human nature proves itself to be historical. With the emergence of language, humans develop self-consciousness and move away from what Marx calls primitive herd consciousness. The herd dissipates into individuals. Forsaking animalistic existence, division of labor comes into being, and then the separation into material and mental labor domains. And one also witnesses the emergence of ideologues who manage these divisions within the world of labor, the priests and the trainers. And all of this increases the complexity of the social form, and consciousness issues into imagination, ideology, theology, ethics, and theory, spheres that pretend to float above nature and the material world. Humanhood is created through work on nature that becomes work per se. That work on nature degrades it and results in its most refined aspect in works of art, with nature reflected, shaped, imitated, arranged, or negated through artifice. Human intervention into plant and animal life is extensive today. Cattle makes for a particularly interesting case because the most advanced technologies are frequently seen to be trialed on the body of cattle. Cows' bodies have historically served as test subjects, as laboratories of future biointervention for things such as IVF and other reproductive technologies. Cows today, and more, crowd together in megafarms, overseen by digital systems, including facial and hide recognition systems. The new factories for cows are air-conditioned sheds where digital machinery monitors and logs each move, each emission, each production of the herd. Every mouthful of milk that is extracted can be traced to source. Cows' emotions are tracked too. The calmer the cow, the higher the milk yield. If there is stress, new reality headsets adapted to a cow's flat face may help, as tested in 2019 in Russia on the Rosmoloko research farm near Moscow. The cows are led through digital animation secured before their eyes to imagine that they wander in bright summer fields, not bleak grey ones. This calms them. They produce more milk. This gives a hint that nature may not be that which is outside of us and on which we work. We too are of nature. What this remodeling of cow existence suggests is a paradox. The more humanized, that is, the more thoroughly saturated by human intention nature becomes, the more humans become herded or animalized. For we too submit to the emotion trackers. We log into the biofeedback machines. We log into tracking and tracing. We let the advertisers' eyes watch us constantly, and the managers store our coordinates. Could we, like these cows, be played by the machinery, our emotions swayed under the predictable ever-sunny skies, without us ever knowing that we're inside the matrix? What nature is this that has no corners to peer around? Will the rejected, unemployed and redundant be deluded into thinking that the world is quite beautiful, a land of milk and honey, as they interact minimally in stripped back care homes in their old age, in the field of the world, in the fields of the new pastures of digital dictatorship? A final thought. For someone associated with the abstruseness of avant-garde music, Adorno was surprisingly sentimental when it came to animals, towards which he felt a powerful affinity. It is with them that Adorno finds something worthy of the name utopia. A vignette of his from Minima Moralia imagines a properly human existence of doing nothing, like, he says, a beast, comme une bête, resting, cloud gazing, mindlessly, placidly chewing cud. To dream, like so many utopians do, of boundless production of goods, of busy activity in the ideal society, of something beyond nature, or for which nature is peculiarly fruitful, reflects, claims Adorno, only an ingrained capitalist mentality of production as the only end, the end in itself. To detach from our historical form, adapted solely to production, to work against work itself, to do nothing in a true society in which we embrace nature and ourselves as natural, might return us to a herd consciousness. That is to say, rejecting the notion of nature as something that would protect us, give us solace, a thought predicated on the fantasy that we are not nature and we seek our redemption in it, leads us into ourselves as interrelated inextricably in nature and in the world. From there, with this new thought, beyond work, post-work, on the water, doing rien comme une bête, we might begin to save ourselves and begin in some way to cause less harm to everything else. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a wonderful summary and also expansion on your essay from the book. Thank you, Esther. Now, if you have any comments or questions, please write them in comments box on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will answer them straight when we will finish the blog. So now I would like to introduce Tomáš Hrůza. Pardon, I'm sorry. Now I would like to introduce Maria Lukáčová, who is the Czech artist working primarily with video and installation. In her practice, she's inspired by and appropriates tropes from politics, mythology, geology, and science, moving across time and space, addressing questions of uncertain future through speculative narrative, fantasy, and poetics. Her recent films focus on environmental issues, politics of the body, and questions of financial capital, using fantasy, collage, and her own written music and animation. She is the co-founder of the feminist activist group called The Fourth Wave, that initiated public debate about sexism in Czech universities in 2006. 2017. Marie won prizes at the International Short Film Festivals Oberhausen and at the Jihlava International Documentary Film Festival. And in 2019, she was nominated for the Jindřich Chalupecký Award. So with this, I'm passing on to Marie. Welcome.
Sorry, I was on mute. Wow, that's
Start
really...
again. Yeah.
Sure. Again. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So thank you. Hi to everyone. I would love to thank you, Eva and Hana, for inviting me for that marvelous project, and also thank for this nice introduction and for this book. And I think it's really beautiful. So. I would love to be really short here, because my contribution to this book is really short story, and I would love to read an even shorter sample of it here. However, before that, I would love to introduce you to my personal consultants, which is there, Manya, Manya and Janka. Okay, that's my tortoise, and yeah, they are quite afraid of me, and now they're really pissed on me. But I would love to show some animals here because it's about animals, and they are my relative animals. So I would love to say that I was quite shocking when I read that reptiles are not so intelligent, even then society give them some kind of wisdom or something like this. However, we lived together for more than 1 or 2 years, I think, and I've been looking at them for a long time because they are close to my table here. But I realized that it's really strange, because I realized that their bodies will live on Earth much longer than mine. And I don't know their gender or real names. But the only thing I know about them is the kind of salad they like. And also that I pull them out of terrarium, they pee on me in 10 minutes, but not my partner. So it's really, really nice to know. But the thing which I would love to say, it's that thinking about animals, about my turtles and others, about their interspecies communication and my own hypocrisy is what led me to write this story. So I would love to read a really short sample. So together with the advent of intensive farming, automated agriculture, and ruined biodiversity, cows understood that life on Earth was decay. They won't let it show, but they've long been engaged in a fight against you and me. Their resistance is invisible but conscious, that it will claim billions of casualties. They've made their decision nonetheless, and not one objected. Every cut is a sign of rebellion. The ozone and the flatulence are mere accompaniments to their #1 weapon. They've mastered their bodies. They talk to every single one of their molecules. Ever since their bodily shapes and contour muscles, bones, and others begin inflating under the invisible hand of the market. They can tell their food just brims with broadcast antibiotics, growth hormones, and other drugs. They excrete none of them. Instead, they let them grow straight into the finest meat, dying in a loving embrace together. With some more than with others, they have what could be called amorous liaison. While alive, they cherish and pamper them, explaining to them in great detail what to do. In the bodies of those who scoff cow meat before reaching the stomach. Their beloved poison soaks through to the abdominal cavity and from there into the entire human bloodstream. It finds a quiet spot and starts proliferating into a clot. Its multi-layered colonies begin digesting the host bit by bit. As humans procreate, these clots divide further. Decade by decade, the clots grow stronger and more resilient. Yeah. So thank you very much. And yeah, that's all.
I would now like to introduce Tomáš Uhnák, who will be the next speaker. Tomáš Uhnák is a researcher in the ideological, social, and discursive aspects of food systems and agricultural paradigms, especially in the context of alternative agri-food movements, food sovereignty, agroecology, and organic farming. Currently a doctoral researcher at the Czech University of Life Sciences, he is also a member of Agroecology Europe and Association of Local Food Initiatives, AMPI, and the coordinator of KPZ Smetanka in Prague. He contributes to development of agroecology and community-supported agriculture and practices food growing and journalism. So now I pass my words to Tomáš Uhnák.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you very much. And first of all, congratulations to Eva, Hana, Ida, and Tomáš for putting together this rather unique selection of writings and images. So cheers to you. And thank you very much for inviting me to this book launch and to sharing of the texts. My contribution in the publication is a, let's call it analytical story, which I titled The Silent Desperation of Aquatic Slaves. As the title suggests, the focus is on the fishing industry and aquaculture, which in my text is representing a blind spot in welfare of fish and also in welfare of human beings that are in daily contact with fish. So at the end, I decided that I will read a few excerpts from the book so that you can get an idea of what's the text about. So, aquaculture or fish farming is one of the quickest growing sectors of food production worldwide. In 2014, for the first time in history, the number of farmed fish overtook the number of fish caught in the wild. Today, fish farms provide about half of all fish production that is consumed around the world. And according to the predictions of the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, this number will rise to 60% in 2030. To give an idea, in 2016, these underwater industrial fish factories produced around 80 million tons of fish. However, given the overfarming of fish and climate change, the oceans have swallowed up to 93% of the heat produced by humans since the 1970s. The number of marine animals has decreased by 70%. It is projected that if we continue to plunder the seas at the current rate and do not mitigate the negative effects of climate change, by 2050, the seas will have almost no fish remaining. In fact, The notional peak of seafood extraction was reached in 1995 already. Since then, the amount of catches has steadily decreased. In the context of this data, the effort to renew the fish population on man-made farms may seem like a step in the right direction. However, there are a large number of criminal and devastating effects hidden from the eyes of the public that this method of farming creates. Despite billions of witnesses, this unsustainable state is constantly escalating. The problem is that these witnesses, both people and fish, are silenced, and our society is not yet able to or willing to listen to them. On the contrary, the ever-rising demand for fish and seafood has created new forms of precarious labor, not just for humans, but also for fish. We will now, let's go together mentally to Myanmar, Burma, to Thailand. Let's try to imagine the sea next, the sea between Myanmar and Burma. And I would like to ask for first image, please. In the United Nations report talks of genocide on the Rohingya ethnic group. Over 1 million people have left the country or ended up in refugee camps. About half of them are children. In an effort to find a relative safe place and livelihood, a great number of Rohingya have set out in boats to destinations like Malaysia and Thailand. This situation is being exploited by human traffickers who abduct defenseless migrants, hold them in camps hidden in the jungle, and demand ransom for their families. If they do not receive it, the migrants are beaten, subjected to daily sexual violence, and denied food and water. Many of the migrants do not survive these conditions. Other than frequent death, these people have one of the two fates. Either their relatives, who are often in similarly desperate situation in a refugee camp, manage to collect the desired ransom and the hostages are released, or they are sold into the slave labor through intermediaries. Some of the worst places where the hostages can end up are fishing boats. Third image, please. Oh, next one. One more, please. Okay, thank you. The price that the captains of the fishing boats pay for one worker is approximately 800 euros. The work is difficult, and if they are unable or unwilling to work, they are thrown into the sea. Those who are able to work are held on the boats for a period of 5 years or so. 10 years is not unheard of. During that time, the boat never docks on land, and the workers never have solid ground under their feet. Attempts to escape usually end in death. Can I have the picture before, please? The second one. Thank you. Decades of overfishing have left the oceans and seas half empty, and boats have to spend an average of 25 times as much time on the sea in order to catch the same amount of fish as in the 1950s. This makes fishing unprofitable. Thousands of fishermen have been forced to abandon their livelihoods and reorient to different sources of income, often smuggling migrants. According to some captains, this activity is 3 times as lucrative as fishing. The more people they bring over, the greater the profit. So they transport thousands of Rohingya migrants a month. A large number of these end up as slaves in the fishing industry. Next image, please. Fourth one. Yeah, thank you. Just as the living space of enslaved people is limited to the area of a boat, or that of a cows in the captivity of factory farms to the size of a stable, fish and shrimp in marine aquaculture also have a clearly delimited space of existence. This fact is associated with the same problems as factory farming of cattle. Fish in factory farms are fed with other fish. A good 20% of small wild fish are processed for so-called MFFO, which stands for fish meal and fish oil. This number, however, is actually much higher because it does not take into account illegal fishing in Asia, from which 69% of meat and 75% of oil is fed to fish in factory farms. The fishing industry is dependent on fish caught in the wild, and in particular, feeding with small feeder fish, so-called, is destroying food chains and destabilizing food security, while 90% of fish used for FMFO could serve as food for people. We can thus observe the destabilization of marine populations and coastal fisherfolk communities whose cultural identity and livelihood are strongly tied to the sea, for example, in Senegal and Gambia. In European Union alone, about 1.7 billion fish raised in factory farms were killed for human consumption in 2015. Although there are today a great number of measures and mechanisms for inspecting the fishing industry in the form of international standards, there is one essential area which has completely evaded attention. Fish are without any protective legislation when being killed. Most fish in the EU are killed with inhuman methods, the most frequent of which are suffocation in air, freezing on shaved ice, and others. There is practically no welfare for the trillions of fish caught every year. There is no unified legislation or measure, neither on the global level nor in the EU. And finally, a re-examination of the welfare, farming, and killing of fish has been driven by, among other things, a growing number of studies researching the intelligence of fish and their perception of a wide range of physical and mental stimuli or experience of emotions and cognitive capabilities. For example, it is worth mentioning a study of a behavior of a convict kishlit, a type of fish, female, who displayed sadness and apathy when she could not be with a partner that she herself had chosen. Fish exhibit coordinated collaboration and use tools. Fish are farmed according to the logic of industrial production, where the legislation of states and international associations is reluctant to acknowledge their dignity and formulate their rights. Meanwhile, research over several decades has shown that fish are equal in cognitive abilities to warm-blooded vertebrates. Some even surpass them. Last remark: human, animal, and environmental rights, however, are formulated separately. The legislation usually does not reflect how the needs are interconnected. One exception is the groundbreaking United Nations Declaration created by the global peasant movement La Via Campesina on the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas, which formulates new, broader type of rights and protections for marginalized and excluded residents of this world, whose subsistence is directly connected to the sea or land. At the same time, these rights and the practices deriving from them implicitly aim towards a symbiotic connection with the environment, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. This declaration can be considered as another attempt to decolonize nature and humans' relationship with it. Its aims are embedded in attempts to deal with the ideology and practice of imperialism and the neocolonialism of the 21st century forming and guarding political, economic, social, and ethnic relationships which are implicit in the control of nature and natural resources. In 1989, the philosopher Donna Haraway asked how love, power, and science are intertwined in the constructions of nature. She further elaborated bringing questions of gender and race into political ecology to enable new narratives to emerge, which have been ignored and fragmented by the capitalist paradigm. Such thinking is constructed. Last image, please. Thank you. Such thinking is constructed on symbiotic interspecies relations, where protection of the natural world becomes center to human activity when interacting with nature, which humans are inseparable from. It can be considered another attempt to decolonize nature and humans' relationship with it. It joins the forces of various members of the precariat, especially those whose voice cannot be heard for a number of reasons, like fish and other species, and strengthen the awareness of mutual dependence. Okay, thank you very much. This is my contribution, or part of the contribution for the publication.
Thank you for this important contribution on a really extremely important subject, perhaps a bit less known subject, but really important on how human and fish exploitation and suffering are interconnected. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Lucia Pietrojusti, our last speaker tonight. Lucia Pietrojusti is a curator working at the intersection of art, ecology, and systems. She's the curator of general ecology at the Serpentine Galleries, London, United Kingdom, a cross-organizational effort dedicated to the implementation of ecological principles through the gallery's public-facing programs, internal infrastructures, and networks. She was the curator of Sun and Sea, Marina, the Lithuanian pavilion at the 58th International Art Exhibition La Biennale di Venezia, and one of the curators of the 13th Shanghai Biennale, Bodies of Water. This year, Pietrojusti will join James Bridle in curating a section of the Helsinki Festival dedicated to artificial and modern human intelligences. Now, I pass my word to you, Lucia.
Thank you so much. So a big thanks to Eva and Hana and Tomáš, and to David, who's doing tech. And also, I'm very grateful to have had an opportunity to listen to Tomáš and Esther and Maria in their presentations, because I think, the perspectives are so different from one another and so nourishing together that I was just very grateful to be able to hear you. So prompted by the invitation, I set myself the task of this thing that had kind of been buzzing in my head of trying to figure out the connection between the metaphorical and the material in a more than human context. And I think I need to explain that, although I don't know if I'll be able to in a few minutes. But another way of saying it is like, if we pause into a metaphor of language and we take it seriously and we try and ask it what kind of things it might reveal about the original kind of material kind of grounding within which it was born. How can we learn about or live the material reality in this more than human world on the basis of those kinds of investigations? So things like, why do we call it a genealogical tree? What is it about trees themselves that might reveal something about their own DNA, the way that they themselves grow, the way that they propagate? that in fact functions like a genealogical tree. So how do we turn the metaphors back on themselves? It's a question that seems really academic, but actually pertains for me to the sort of role that art and imagination and symbols in general, and also religion, spirituality, all kinds of sort of human endeavors play in the making sense and holding memory about a more than human world. So that was sort of the task. And so practically the piece kind of goes all over the place. It starts with chopping chickens. It's about giving birth to rabbits. It's about eating Jesus Christ, kissing babies, making bread, and the erotics and composting aspects of grief and mourning. It's about, for example, how calling a bread yeast starter a mother, as it's called in English and in Italian, as far as I know, but maybe in other languages as well, might sort of in turn reveal something about motherhood, for example. It's also about dissolving into one another as bodies, dissolving the boundaries of the self with other bodies, dissolving the boundaries of species, and how that might correspond to a kind of ecological vision that is itself echoed in many mystical traditions, cultural traditions, and indeed psychedelic traditions and experiences as well. So I'm just going to read you a couple of passages really quickly. Taking metaphors seriously, looking within them for manifestations of deep-time human knowledge about our place on this planet, is an exercise that puzzles and fascinates me to the point of obsession. In bread making, a yeast starter is also referred to as a mother. Quote, "Feed the bitch or she will die," unquote. Anthony Bourdain, the chef, recalls his baker friend barking at him over the phone. And then Bourdain goes on to describe this yeast starter, a massive, quote, "a massive foaming, barely contained heap of fermenting grapes, flour, water, sugar, and yeast." And I suppose the question I asked myself was, what would taking this metaphor seriously yield? In other words, could we reverse the metaphor back onto itself and ask the yeast as an investigative partner to help us uncover a deeper wisdom about mothering, birthing, the oneness of the body? So the yeast starter is fed. It's also a feeder. At the point of the event of separation, a part of the starter is taken from its main body to subsequently continue to grow into another mother, another starter, or indeed be baked into a loaf of bread. If we assume the yeast mother as a body, even though it's swarming and multicellular, of course, doesn't it then, in spite of separation, suggest that it continues to be the same one body that is just separating pieces of it from itself? After all, we know that there are loaves that are baked from yeast bodies that are as old as 4,500 years. So this is what calling yeast a mother said to me, and how it made sense of something very deep and very strange that I perceived pre-linguistically through pregnancy and birth, through mutual and continuous incorporation and transformation. I felt we are all and have always been a nested set of events within one singular body. We say to our babies, "You're so cute, I could eat you." We nibble on their chubby 7-month-old thighs. We kiss them ravenously, love them desperately. Over time, we become less and less permitted to recall that profound, near mystical understanding of them as the infleshed manifestation, not of our metaphorical selves, our ambitions, or our lineage, but our actual body. Making babies hovers somewhere, and here I've always referred to babies, and particularly my son, as a kind of more than human being or an animal. So consider a sort of more than human being. Making babies hovers somewhere in the middle distance between self and almost self. And over time, the profound organic truth of this fact is obfuscated by culture, by taboo, and by scientific reduction. Birth, and this is how I lived it in the hallucinatory ecstasy of fever, is one body shedding its own older skin. And that skin was me, mourning the distance. And then here's another piece about rabbits. Policing the boundaries of the species is a historically contingent, relatively recent project, instrumental to and inextricable from the colonial one. If, as James Sandberg argues in a book called The 18th Century, the Intellectual and Cultural Context of English Literature, Enlightenment thought can be traced back to Newtonian science and the notion that man can formulate the laws of the universe around, quote, him. One of the most essential features of Enlightenment thought is the turning of the outside world, outside the mind, into the object of scientific inquiry. The gaze here is lucid, unidirectional, and utterly non-implicated. In this sense, the gap between observer and observed widens, a cleavage that still plagues our dysphoric and disenchanted relationship with the environment today. Categories and species and boundaries, these become intellectual prerequisites through which life becomes intelligible. Yet, like its own unwanted shadow, like a fugitive symptom, the 18th century Western popular imagination is rife with feral children, anthropomorphized apes, monstrous births. They haunt writing and legend alike at the very same time that the taxonomic and an imperialist process begin to take root into the natural sciences, threatening the guarded boundaries of self with the conceivability of their collapse. And here's a tiny little piece on the rabbits. In 1726, Mary Toft, a woman from Guildford in Surrey in England, began to give birth to rabbits. Over a few grueling and closely reported weeks, she delivered 9 in all the rabbits stillborn and in pieces, as well as 3 legs of a tabby cat and the content of the guts of the cat, as in the backbone of an eel. So the text then goes on to talking about the grotesque and the sort of boundary dissolution that is involved in the kind of popular imagination of how Mary Toft's story was kind of received and how it fit within that kind of specific historical context. And then the text goes on, and then it sort of revisits a piece of art by the artist Felix González Torres, which was a piece about mourning his lost partner to the symptoms of HIV. And how that piece kind of brings back something that I referred to in the text at the very beginning, which has to do with a kind of mystical reading of the Eucharist. I cite the medieval mystic Hadewig in the way that she describes the Eucharist as a kind of becoming one with Christ. Anyway, it goes on about that, and then it talks about composting. And it ends like this: there is no loss and no gain. There is vibrancy and transformation, temporary form, cycles of time, and things that we are just barely aware of, and only in song. It is in us and between us all, this more than humanness that forms and reforms, breaks down and forms again. That which is numinous and divine is the vibrancy of how complexity itself creates emergent, complex form. It is our interdependency and interconnection. It is the care with which we commit to that fragile interdependency and are obligated to it. We, us, these beings, give ourselves away and birth and love and eat one another in gestures and in rituals and in events that are full of grief and full of love, because grief is full of love. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Lucia, for this like wonderful presentation and for like summarizing your text so well. It is a beautifully poetic piece of writing, and it was such a joy to read. And I hope our audience, or that you kind of like enjoy it as much as me and Eva as we did when we read it first time. So now, I would like to maybe like turn. We've been here for an hour and a half, so I'm aware of time, and maybe we have about, Eva and I prepared about 10 questions, but obviously this is obviously we won't be able to get through that many, and we would like to give really an opportunity to please, if anyone has any questions or comments, if they could type them into comments panel, which is on the right hand side of the screen. And in the meanwhile, maybe I would open with some questions. I was very like interested in this, like when Esther mentioned this sort of like how can we actually like become more beast-like and refuse work, and I kind of was very much interested in this like as a counter strategy to these sort of like systems of exploitation. And so maybe I would like ask, maybe I would start with the question that is, because the first question is obviously, we wrote this first question which says, what would you say are the most important issues and questions of the human and other than human relationship today? And on a reflection, this is like an enormous question. And so maybe I would like to maybe move on this question that talks about like the possibilities of resistance. So because that's a question that like maybe relates to all of us who are part of this debate. So where do we see the possibilities of resistance? How can we practically form more equitable relations with animals? And you can talk about concrete projects and examples from and beyond the book. So obviously you may be like, you know, like everybody, maybe you've moved with your research somewhere else. So it would be maybe nice to kind of like open this debate with the idea of like resistance or counter strategy. How can we actually think about different and more equitable relationship with animals in artworks or in projects like La Campesina, etc. So yeah, I would like to open this, and whoever would like to start. So yeah, I don't want to like address this question in particular on everyone. So yeah. So Tomáš, you, for example, mentioned La Campesina, and it would be maybe interesting. Maybe you can start because to get sort of debate going, and
sure.
We could like think about what are the other like options, what are the issues with these like strategies that we can constitute as a resistance.
Okay. Well, when I read the question, I kind of, to be perfectly honest, I didn't know how to grasp it, because it could be viewed from quite a few angles. Well, the one angle which is mostly common to my reality and reality of my colleagues is the reality of organic farming and peasant farming or agroecology, a type of farming, which inherently on different levels, be it organic, certified organic farming, or be it non-certified but more, let's say, democratic way of non-hierarchical standards of sharing the knowledge, for example, or treating biodiversity as, so to say, means of production in a way, in a sense. So the lowest common denominator of, I wouldn't call it resistance as such. I would this would be a starting point for me. Is organic farming, where the standards of welfare are formulated in such a way that animals can behave freely or behave according to their needs. And there's a lot of experimentation going on, for example, with in particular with biodynamic farming, where in milk production, for example, and the other speakers also mentioned the aspect of milk and extracting milk from cows. In organic and biodynamic farming, the farmers take only the milk that is left after the cattle is being fed. So the cattle lives with the mom, with the mom cow, for a very, very long period of time, much longer than in conventional farms, and the farmer simply takes what is left. And this doesn't apply to cows only. This applies to all animals that we kind of are trying to share the resources of the land, of the grass, of the milk, but the focus isn't on the productivity part. The focus is on the value added in terms of how long the cow lives, for example. Does it live happy life, so to say? And then, of course, there are more radical forms of resistance, which comes also from the declaration that I mentioned, the United Nations Declaration of Peasants' Rights, on the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas, which is trying to reformulate our relationship, or the relationship of peasants, people who depend on the land and seas where they get their cultural and nutritional value from. And of course, I could mention demonstrations, etc., as forms of kind of let's say lobbying on a national level or international level. But on the other hand, I think that the more effective or more interesting form of resistance, which comes to my mind, is integration of, or attempt of integration of agroecology and food sovereignty principles into national legislation, into mainly national strategies, agriculture strategies, so that they are being scaled up, let's say, so that it doesn't become a niche. For example, agroecology and the food sovereignty narrative is not a niche, but a common denominator, which is spread through which the policymakers are, for example, formulating the policies and the narratives. So it's kind of bottom-up strategy to incorporate different viewpoints on how to interact with nature and resources, limited resources, we should say. Yeah, sorry for the long answer. I hope I covered it at least partially.
If I come in now, thank you to everyone for really fascinating talks. I just wanted to briefly say 3 possible types of resistance, and one is practical, not as practical as Tomáš, and quite niche, but I thought what cooking sections did with their project Salmon, a Red Herring, was really interesting. It was a panoramic display at Tate Britain, as well as an essay and work around it that looked at the conditions of factory farmed salmon and the addition of artificial colorants in order to produce this spectrum of reds for consumer expectations, and it exposed the horrendous conditions of factory farming, and I suppose that through a presentation, a kind of essay panorama, one was educated, and there was a practical niche result that Tate does not serve salmon anymore in its restaurants, but also I think a sophisticated essay that thought about the semiotics and the meaning of the sign salmon and pinkness was interestingly done. In imaginative terms, I was really excited by Lucia's talk, because that sense of taking the metaphor seriously, I think, is what Melanie Jackson and I tried to do in our work on milk and dairy. And so I think there's an imaginative, and of course, we're not the only ones to do that, but it's this idea of an imaginative opening up. So milk in its wholeness, in its fullness, becomes this spectrum for exploration through which one comes to understand both our affective relationships to milk, our production of milk, and there for Limerick we looked very specifically at the Irish case of grass-fed milk and how, or grass-fed cows, and what that produced and how that came out of a specific colonial and post-colonial situation in Ireland. So I think there is something entering through language and metaphor into these huge systems of myth and production that can be revelatory. And then my third example is speculative. I've been teaching yesterday Afrofuturism, again, very different topic, but then I started to speculate on a kind of animal futurism and a sort of myth-laden futuristic idea around animals. And I keep coming back to this idea of these radioactive pigs around Chernobyl who are very aggressive and attack humans. And, you know, so is there like this, is there a resistance through, I mean, it's gruesome in many ways, and it's what we have done to those animals, but at the same time, this is a historical production of the pig. You know, one could imagine these sort of enhanced hordes of animals that through the radioactivity we've subjected them to resist as animals and turn against humans and, you know, wipe us out or something. But anyway, that's just some food for thought.
Thank you. I mean, in that way, it's also almost fascinating to think about like how would this conception of equitable relationship look if we like if it wasn't human-centered, obviously, because we have this like human-centered ideas about how we should improve the relationship with the animal, but perhaps if the human-centered approach is gone, then like radioactive pigs running around Chernobyl are like actually like responses that we can like, you know, maybe that's something that Maria discusses in her text in like some sort of like mutation in whatever we call nature that can be called like a strategy of like a resistance, or like resistance that happens as a way of like responses of this interconnected world between metaphors and language, and between the matter of like as its radioactivity, as its human and animal body kind of like meeting there as a side. Yeah. Okay. Maybe like does anyone want to elaborate or add anything to this like questions of resistances, like Lucia or someone else? Like we could move. Eva, do you want to choose another question?
Well, so maybe like since you spoke about the possibilities of resistance, I would be curious to know, and I will try to glue together two questions we had prepared. One is, what are the specific possibilities of art when stepping into interspecies relationships and transgression of boundaries between species? So if you could try to answer that, and maybe connected with some concrete examples of more successful examples in recent art that are trying to break the traditional power dynamics, because art does not always necessarily suggest more empathic or equal relationship with animals. Naming Pierre Ig, some of his realizations, Ukraine, as well as some more extreme examples like Hermann Nitsch or the exhibition of Chinese art in MoMA, and many other examples that perhaps do not display the most equal and empathic relationship to animals and to the natural world in general. So in case the question was clear, what are the specific possibilities of art when stepping into interspecies relationship? And if you can give some concrete examples of successful realizations in the field of art, and again, whoever wants to take that.
Okay, like Lucia, go.
Ah, I'm unmuted. Hello. No, I mean it's sort of a follow-up to the previous question, really, because the thing that came to mind that I think is really fundamental, and I think it's sort of like it's coming, it's sort of coming in thought and in cultural practice for sure, is the fact that the boundaries of what constituted a human were sort of very politically contingent and very politically motivated, and intersect with questions around empire and colonization in so many more ways than one, so that the human in like anthropocentric thought was always a kind of very specific human, and that those policing those boundaries was kind of had and continues to have huge political stakes. And so I weirdly had the book just next to me, so it sort of prompted me to pick up The Nutmeg's Curse, which is Amitav Ghosh's latest, which really tries to draw a connection between empire, colonization, and kind of environmental breakdown by looking at it in historical terms. And sort of he goes into like very specific analyses of the genocide of Native Americans and the sort of settler colonial project in the Americas, and how human and non-human, violent and sort of pretend passive agents like illness, like disease and so on, bacterial agents and so on, more than human agents, were sort of deployed in the war against everything he talks about as a kind of omnicide that happened in the Americas over the period of colonization. But he really also talks about it as a cultural project, as a project that in the first instance needed to render this like more than human world that was active and imaginative and vital and ensouled. So like a, not necessarily animist, I mean, we don't even need to go into a sort of theology, but sort of a world that was active and vibrant and responding to one another with and without like the species called humans. That to sort of kill that vitalism was the essential cultural prerequisite, the kind of mythological prerequisite necessary to create a myth of an earth that was static, that was dead, and therefore that was extractable and that was colonizable. And that's exactly what colonial powers did, and included humans in that pot, right? So considered the notion of the terra nullius includes the killing in metaphor and in myth before it actually happens in real life of humans and more than humans beings at the same time. And so there's this amazing passage where he's basically like renewing forms of vitalism, telling stories that kind of renew forms of vitalism, of the vitality of more than human beings, is a cultural project that is as important as it was crucial in the violent project of empire. It's as important now for repair as it was then for destruction. So he says, it's a great burden that rests upon writers, artists, filmmakers, and everyone else who is involved in the telling of stories. To us falls the task of imaginatively restoring agency and voice to non-humans. As with all the most important artistic endeavors in human history, this is a task that is at once aesthetic and political. And because of the magnitude of the crisis that besets the planet, it is now freighted with the most pressing moral urgency. So I just thought that it'd be a good sort of example to cite. As per the examples in art, I mean, first of all, it's interesting because when I saw the prep questions before, I just thought, well, actually, I would take issue with the fact that Thierry's involvement with more than human beings is less than empathetic, but we can have that conversation later. I think I would just cite like all of ancient, not so much recent examples, although there are enormous amounts, but all of ancient cultures throughout all geographies really have tree goddesses, have what the anthropologist Eduardo Viveros de Castro indicates as like human is actually an indexical rather than a stable term. Indexical means something like there or here. It doesn't mean the same thing if like Eva says here, or if I say here, we obviously mean different things. And Eduardo Viveros de Castro says human is an unstable indexable category, which means that for the jaguar is human from the jaguar's point of view. And then the human in that encounter becomes prey and so on. And so to have that perspectival approach, I think, is like such an important feature in most of poetry, most of myth. I mean, if we look at Sumerian poetic traditions and Egyptian, I mean, we can go anywhere. Most of creation myths, actually, which are really, really beautiful things to read. I would say that art has always done that, and that it's only in a very brief period in history, in Western human history, that hasn't featured. But it's sort of throughout most of the deep time of human life on Earth, art was the medium through which we transmitted that form of empathy, that form of mutual knowledge, those kinds of obligations and responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Eva or anybody would like to respond to?
Yeah, maybe I just, really briefly I thought about the resistance and about also the art. And I guess that the best way of resistance is make this topic really sexy for pop culture and for young generation, which is also some kind of mind topic. And I guess that we have a lot of movies which are pretty similar, for example, for my way to think about for my way of story in a book, but for example, snakes in a plane, or Black Sheep, or this last movie about of Agnieszka Holland. I don't know the name, but Spur or something like this. Where you create, where you present animal like someone who is really danger. For example, there is a lot of sheep, and they are really, really angry on people, and you describe the reason or why they are angry, and you make a movie. And I think that the movie is really has a really power for today's generation and moving image. And I guess that huge way of resistance is to make moving images about that. So yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think I'm glad, Maria, because I think like this perspective that that we need, that this was one of the things that we were trying to like discuss with Eva a lot, like how to like present this like very complicated images, and that sort of show animal suffering, and how to like really position the book. So I think like the strategy of like how to find some sort of like energy in the, or what maybe it can be maybe called vitalism in this project, that will actually somehow like channel the energy differently. Maybe that would be like something that art can do, like rewiring this sort of like maybe different libidinal and sensual and affective forces that are at play. But I'm also like glad for Lucia for the like this criticism, because it is so easy to forget that we like, that we are the West, and this is like somehow we are positioned here. And I'm glad for this like a reminder of like ancient cultures, and like the way that art has maybe, as you said, like position itself towards like empathy with the natural world in different cultures. And that was one of the things that I felt like that maybe was left unexplored in the book, that sort of like the relationship with global South. And so that was definitely something that we acknowledge, that sort of like there is definitely space and space for like to go a lot more in depth in thinking beyond the confines of like Eurocentric art and culture. So I definitely agree with that point with that criticism, if that was how you like.
It was not a criticism.
No, that's like it is. I mean, that's my self-criticism. So, I mean, I felt like we kind of like should have kind of like thought that we haven't quite achieved to like move beyond certain our own borders, or like, yeah. But anyway, I mean, like, we have about 7 minutes, so we can either, if someone wants to add to it, I maybe wouldn't open another question because yeah, so if anyone would like to add to anything, either from question that we like presented, because maybe you prepared something to respond. I really don't know why comments questions are not working, because I never use the StreamYard software, so it is always difficult in the way to be on the side as an audience. But maybe if there was anything from the questions or from the debate, or Eva, if you wanted to add anything to like what has been discussed, maybe that would be an interesting, yeah, or if you want to, yeah. So if anybody.
Well, I was rather hoping to hear more from our guests, from our speakers, than speaking myself. But maybe we should just say a few words about the title. That's one option, or still hope for some questions coming for the audience. We were having big discussions about the title, obviously, because this is always very important kind of framing for the project, and for us, the title was a way how to like encourage us to rethink our interactions with nature, conducted from the position of dominance and through normative patterns of language or categories of science, and search for other perhaps more direct or more empathetic ways of relating to each other, based on what we have in common rather than what separates us, however cliche it might sound. And the title somehow also wanted to invite us or you to activate and use more of our senses, or to use other senses than those that we usually activate, and in general to perform constant attempts to be connected with each other, as otherwise we cannot feel or see or hear that what the other might be suffering for, or if the other is, for example, calling for help and so on, especially if the other doesn't speak our language. So this is just a few comments to the title to fill the gap.
Hi, I too was really interested in Lucia's comment about a way in which other art forms, non-Western ancient art forms, might give models of empathy. Because when I was thinking about contemporary artists working through animals, they all seem to come not from the a kind of positive perspective, but more a critical negative one. So I was thinking about Heather Phillipson, who's very prominent about her veganism, and did this big display at Gloucester Road Tube Station, which was all about our violent relationship to eggs. And this was sort of presented as a public artwork for commuters. And then I was also thinking about Andrea Arnold, filmmaker, has recently made a film called Cow, which is about the brutality. I can't watch it because I can't look at these things, the brutality of the dairy industry. And then say Mariana Simnet, whose work on the dairy farm is not critical of capitalist structures, but there's this strong projection of herself into the extractive and exploitative relationship to the cow. In some way, it's also quite surreal. So I was thinking of those, and then thinking that they're all women artists. Is that relevant? The only other example I could think of, which goes in a very different direction, was Philip Pareno and his work with the squid in Anywen as not a kind of critical relationship to the exploitation of squids, but part of this more kind of futuristic quest for a sense of other intelligences, non-human intelligence, the extended capacities of the squid to change color, to crinkle its skin, to communicate through electrical signals, which felt much more like that path of biomimicry that's quite popular within science, of humans emulating the capacity of animals in order then probably to exploit it or to use it in the service of making capitalism work better in some way. So those were just some of my thoughts about contemporary artists' engagements with animals as food and as resource in some way.
Thank you. Yeah, I was also like very much like thinking about like, because there's this always, and that maybe might be my closing remark, that like maybe is the last thing that I would like to say, is like how to actually because that's the question often like young artists when I'm teaching, they just sort of like, how do you move beyond this, like this idea of just representing the animal in your artwork, you know, how to make it actually like, how to actually position yourself so this relationship is recognizing that there are certain, that this relationship can be beneficial to the animal. So maybe from, and there are work by Aneta Muna-Kíša, who are, and Lucia Tkáčová, they are Czech, Slovakian, Romanian artists, and they sort of like work, for example, with ants, and they use, for example, dig a bone in the forest. They use bones in their artwork, and they sort of like, they use used bones from like meat industry, and they let ants to clean the bone to like completely, if you dig it in the forest, the bone sort of gets completely cleaned by the ants. So they are like collaborators on this artistic project. And I quite like this idea of like, how can we think about like collaborating with animals in the way that we can find this equity in terms of like, in that relationship. And that's a very open question, obviously. That's sort of something that I would like to maybe like close with. Thank you. Okay. Shall we probably like, Eva?
Yeah, I would also like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you to all the speakers, all the authors who contributed to the book. And I would just like to say that I'm aware that in this time when our values and capacities and our sensibilities are hugely tested, very naturally the ones that we care for the most at the moment are our closest ones, our families and friends and so on. But please don't forget about animals, because they are they are often the ones that are left behind in the times of war or other crises. So to animals at the end.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our audience. Thank you. Goodbye.